Imagine, if you will, standing in the sweltering heat of a 9th century jungle right in Central America.
Oh, it'd be incredibly intense. The heat, the humidity.
Exactly. But you're not just looking at the jungle. You are watching the charred bones of a divine, king-like, an actual living god being methodically crushed into gravel.
Just completely pulverized.
Right, pulverized, mixed with dirt, and then used to pave a brand new public plaza.
Which is just a staggering image when you really think about it.
It is, because, we usually picture the ancient Maya as this unbreakable, monolithic society.
Right, the classic movie poster version.
Yeah, we imagine absolute dictators ruling from the tops of towering pyramids, right? Up until, well, one day, the whole civilization just mysteriously vanished.
The famous collapse.
The famous collapse. But what if that dramatic collapse wasn't actually the end of the story? What if it was a violent, calculated, and incredibly successful democratic revolution?
I mean, that idea completely upends the way we traditionally view ancient history.
It really does.
Because we have this tendency to think of ancient societies as these rigid, fragile things, Like they function at the absolute peak of autocratic power right up until the moment they shatter.
Right, like glass. They just break.
Exactly. We rarely give them credit for being adaptable. But what we're actually looking at here in this specific period is a society actively negotiating a massive existential crisis.
By totally rewriting the rules.
Yes, they are tearing up the political playbook and completely changing the rules of how power was held, how it was expressed, and how it was shared.
And if you are joining us for this deep dive, you are someone who loves getting past that movie poster version of history, right? You want to find out how the gears actually turned.
And we have some incredible gears to look at today.
We really do. We have an amazing stack of sources today centered around a fascinating research paper. It was published in the journal Antiquity.
By Dr. Cristina Halperin, Carmen Ramos-Hernandez, and Lorian Gauthier.
Yes, and it details their recent excavations at a major Maya site called Ucanal, which is located in modern-day Guatemala.
It's a fantastic site. The work they're doing there is just groundbreaking.
So our mission today is to explore how the Maya, at this specific city, transitioned from these secretive divine kingships to a cooperative, consensus-based government.
And the coolest part is how they did it physically.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to look at how they literally built the concept of transparency right into their architecture.
Which is such a tangible way to trace political evolution, because we aren't just reading biased historical accounts carved into some stone monument.
Right. History written by the victors.
Exactly. Instead, we are looking at the physical footprint of how humans were forced to interact with one another.
To give you a modern analogy, think about a massive legacy corporation today.
Okay, I like this.
Imagine a company where the CEO sits in this highly guarded top-floor suite.
With the heavy mahogany doors.
Heavy doors, only accessible by a private elevator. You need a special key card to even get to the floor.
Completely isolated from the actual workers.
Right. Now imagine a massive market crash hits. The company is failing, money is bleeding out, and the only way the executives can survive is to rip all of that out.
They have to come down to earth.
They move down to the ground floor, and they build an open-plan office with glass walls. And now the shareholders and the entry-level employees, they can stand right there and watch their every single move.
It's a radical shift. It's a shift in what philosophers call the conduct of conduct.
The conduct of conduct. I love that phrase.
Yeah, it's great, right? It means the underlying logic of how a society manages itself and its people. And what Dr. Halperin and her team at the Proyecto Arqueológico Ucanal have uncovered, well, it's basically a masterclass in political survival.
But to really feel the impact of that survival, like to understand how wild this transition is, we have to look at the baseline first.
You have to know what they were surviving from.
Exactly. We need to know what it felt like to live in the traditional Maya world before the bottom fell out. So let's go back to the classic period in the southern Maya lowlands.
So we're talking roughly 8300 to 810.
Right. You have these rulers, and they aren't just kings. They are the Kuhul Ajaw.
The Kuhul Ajaw, which translates to Holy Lord. And that distinction, it's absolutely critical.
Because they're not just politicians.
Far from it. Their authority wasn't just secular. It wasn't merely about, controlling the army or managing the local economy.
Right. It's way deeper than that.
The Kuhul Ajaw was the literal intermediary between the human world and the cosmological realm.
Like a bridge between us and the gods.
Exactly. Their physical bodies, their rituals, their bloodletting ceremonies, these were viewed as the literal mechanisms that kept the universe functioning.
Wow.
They made the sunrise, they made the rainfall.
So their power is baked into the very fabric of reality itself. Like if you are a farmer in the classic period, questioning the king isn't just treason.
No, it's a threat to the entire agricultural cycle. If you question the king, maybe the rains don't come.
That is a terrifying amount of leverage over a population.
It is. And the architecture of the classic period was designed to reinforce that psychological weight every single day.
How so? Like, what did it physically look like?
Well, if you look at how these cities were built, the supreme, unquestionable power of the Holy Lord was expressed through deeply imposing spaces.
Like the pyramids, obviously.
We all know the massive temple pyramids, sure. But for day-to-day governance, the key structures were the royal palaces.
Okay, the palaces.
And these were highly segmented, heavily enclosed, and physically restrictive.
Walk us through one of those. If you or I were somehow magically permitted into a classic period Maya city, what does that palace actually feel like to navigate?
Well, you would be immediately struck by the sheer mass of the stone.
Just huge, heavy blocks.
Right. Imagine walking toward a massive complex built on a raised platform. To get inside, you have to pass through narrow doorways set into incredibly thick, heavy masonry walls.
So it's dark, it's enclosed.
Very dark. Inside, the spaces are divided into small interior rooms with heavy vaulted stone roofs. The architecture creates what we call an apical hierarchy.
Apical, meaning like the apex of a triangle.
Exactly that geometry.
A structure that peaks at a single isolated point.
Yes. The physical space is essentially a funnel. It restricts access the higher up you go.
So the closer you get to the king, the harder it is to actually get to him.
Exactly. The architecture is explicitly designed to limit visibility. If you were a common farmer, or even, say, a lower-level merchant, you couldn't just wander into the courtyard and see the king.
Right. There's no open-door policy.
Absolutely not. The physical separation created a profound psychological separation. It trained the populace to understand that the king was isolated, sacred, and fundamentally removed from the mundane world.
So the building is doing the heavy lifting of maintaining the political order.
It really is.
It physically forces you to understand your place in the hierarchy just by trying to walk through a door.
Yes, you feel your subordinate status in your bones as you try to navigate the space.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because that raises a massive question for me. If the architecture, the religion, and the politics are all fundamentally resting on the idea that this one guy is a living god.
A literal linchpin of the universe.
Right. How does that just stop? I mean, wouldn't a sudden shift toward power sharing be viewed as absolute sacrilege? How do you even begin to dismantle a system where the boss is basically a god?
It would be complete sacrilege under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
But the shift toward power sharing wasn't born out of some sudden peaceful enlightenment.
It wasn't a philosophical awakening.
Not at all. It was forged in the fires of a systemic collapse. Which brings us to the Terminal Classic period.
And when is that exactly?
Roughly AD 810 to 1000. And this era is defined by widespread, catastrophic political instability.
Just a total breakdown.
Across the southern Maya lowlands, you see severe droughts, massive soil exhaustion, and really significant population reductions.
So the status quo was basically failing to keep people fed and alive.
When the rains don't come year after year and the crops fail repeatedly, that divine mandate of the kuho ajaw, it shatters.
Because they're supposed to bring the rain. And if they can't,
Then their bloodletting rituals are clearly no longer working. The old system of enclosed palaces and isolated rulers simply couldn't manage the sheer scale of the crisis.
they were losing control.
The Maya were backed into a corner. They had to innovate or they were going to vanish entirely.
And to see the physical evidence of that innovation and really the violent rejection of the old ways, we can look at a very specific event at Ucanal at the dawn of the 9th century.
It's a fascinating archaeological moment.
The researchers describe a profound political rupture. They found evidence of a massive fire. But I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
It's an ancient city in the middle of a dense jungle. Things burn. How do archaeologists look at an ash layer and know definitively that this was a deliberate, targeted political revolution, rather than just an accidental brush fire or, say, a rival army raiding the city?
That's a great question. It really comes down to the meticulous mechanics of the stratigraphy and the very specific nature of what was burned.
Okay, so what was in the fire?
Well, first off, this wasn't a broadcast burn across the whole city. It wasn't a forest fire that got out of hand. The researchers found that a late classic royal tomb had been specifically targeted.
They dug it up.
Yes, it was excavated and actively destroyed, and the fire was incredibly intense.
So they needed a lot of fuel.
A lot of fuel, high heat, suggesting a deliberate, sustained cremation-style event rather than just a passing raid where you torch a thatched roof and run.
And it's the inventory of what they found in that ash layer that really tells the story, right?
That is the smoking gun. They didn't just burn the physical structure of the tomb, they took the human remains of a former divine king.
The actual bones.
The bones, along with highly precious jade and marine shell ornaments.
And why are those specific items so important?
In the classic Maya world, jade and marine shells were the ultimate inalienable symbols of royal divine power.
They were the crown jewels.
Exactly. They were the crown jewels. The perpetrators burned the bones, intentionally shattered and burned the jade and the shells, and then, and this is the crucial part, they didn't just leave it all sitting there in a pile.
Right, they put it to use. They used it as construction fill.
They gathered up all this burned, destroyed royal material and literally used it as the foundational dirt and gravel in the renovation of a new temple pyramid.
The structure K2, right, over in Plaza K.
Yes, structure K2.
I mean, think about the psychological impact of that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're living there, you are literally taking the charred bones and the shattered crown jewels of the old regime, and you are paving over them to build your new public square.
It's the ultimate political statement.
You are physically burying the concept of the divine king beneath the feet of the new era. It's incredibly poetic in a very brutal way.
It is a highly symbolic severance of the visual and material ties to that specific dynastic line. They're saying, we are done with you.
And this fiery rupture paves the way for a completely new kind of ruler at Ucanal.
It creates a vacuum and someone steps in.
And the epigraphic sources, the written records they found, introduce us to a figure named
Patmala. And he is fascinating because he is completely anachronistic to the traditional idea of a Maya king.
Right. He doesn't fit the mold at all.
He breaks the mold entirely. To begin with, his name is of foreign origin.
So he's not even a local guy.
No. Epigraphers who study the glyphs note that the name Patmal likely derives from the Gulf Coast region. It associates him with the Petén or Chantal Maya.
Wait, let's pause on the Petén and Chantal Maya for a second. Who were they, and why does it matter that he might be connected to them?
So the Chantal Maya from the Tabasco and Campeche coastal areas, they were essentially the great merchant warriors of the era.
Okay, so they're businessmen, but heavily armed.
Exactly. They controlled massive, long-distance canoe trade networks all around the Yucatan Peninsula.
Wow, so they were really connected.
Very connected. They were cosmopolitan, highly mobile, and very pragmatic. They dealt in trade, not just isolated divine rule.
So Patmel is not a local noble who just quietly climbed the ranks of the Ucanal court.
Not at all. He is an outsider. He comes in with ties to a very different, very economically driven culture. And furthermore, when he actually takes power at Ucanal, he doesn't even use the traditional royal title.
Right. He rejects the local Conwesnol emblem glyph, which was like the old title of the holy lords of this city.
He leaves it behind. Instead, he rules using the title Oxkin Kalumte.
Okay. Oxkin Kalumte. Break down the technical meaning of that for us, because I know there's a lot of weight in those specific words.
Well, Oxkin translates to west, or the setting sun.
Okay, west.
But in Maya political terminology, the west carries a deep association with Teotihuacan, or powerful, distant western origins. It implies a broad regional authority, not just a local one.
And Kalum.
Kalumte is a very high title. It translates roughly to an overlord or a paramount ruler with very strong military connotations.
So by calling himself the Oxkin Kalumte, he is basically saying, look, I am not your local, geographically bound rain god. I am a massive regional military and economic player.
He is stepping in as a hegemon. His authority is broader, and it's much more horizontal than the deeply vertical, localized divine right of the old regime.
It is such an incredible narrative. Like, the systemic crisis hits, the old royal tomb gets torched, and in walks this cosmopolitan merchant warrior overlord.
And he just completely changes the rules of the game.
Which brings us into what Dr. Halperin and her team call the Renaissance of Ucanal. Because Patmal didn't just conquer the city and then build himself a bigger, thicker palace to hide in.
No, he and his successors did the exact opposite.
They initiated an incredible urban florescence. But the key here is looking at who this new construction was designed to benefit.
Exactly. Under Patmal and the terminal classic rulers who followed him, we see a massive influx of public works geared specifically toward the non-elites.
The sources outline some very specific projects they did. They built a brand new T-shaped ball court.
Which was huge for public gatherings.
Right. They constructed these circular and semicircular shrines. But the one that really stands out, the one that blew my mind, is the crucial water infrastructure.
The water systems are the most telling part of all of this.
Because the researchers explicitly note that this new water system was designed to benefit the non-elite residents living in the lower topographic zones of the city.
Right. And we really have to understand the mechanics of Maya water management to see why this is so important.
Break it down for us.
Well, in the dense seasonal jungle, controlling water is literally controlling life. There are long, dry seasons. Traditionally, massive plastered reservoirs were located high up.
Near the palaces.
Yes, near the central elite precincts. The elites controlled the water, and therefore they controlled the populace. If you wanted water during a drought, you had to go to the elite.
So how did Petmazul's new system change that?
The new infrastructure involved creating catchments and canal systems that actively directed water down into the lower elevation neighborhoods.
So they were piping it right to the commoners.
They were investing the city's heavy labor and engineering resources to directly improve the health, sanitation, and agricultural stability of everyday people.
And it wasn't just water either. The archaeological record shows that everyday people suddenly gained access to imported goods.
Trade goods that used to be incredibly restricted.
Right. Middle status and even lower status residences are suddenly turning up with items that used to be strictly controlled by the upper crust.
Obsidian, certain ceramics.
The physical gap between how the elites lived and how the non-elites lived was visibly shrinking.
Which brings us to a vital theoretical concept that underpins this entire study. The idea of structuring structures.
Structuring structures. Let's dive into that. How do structures actually structure us?
It's a fascinating concept. It draws heavily on the work of the 20th century philosopher Michel Foucault.
Okay, Foucault.
Specifically, his writings on spatial configurations and power. The fundamental idea is that buildings are never just passive backdrops.
They aren't just scenery.
No. A building is not merely a container for human activity. It is an active participant in shaping social behavior.
Okay, think about the physical spaces in our modern lives for a second. The layout of a DMV is structured to make you wait in lines, right? To process you like a number.
That's a perfect example.
Or think about modern hostel architecture, like a park bench designed with a metal armrest right in the middle.
Oh, right.
It's not there for your comfort. It's designed specifically so a homeless person cannot lie down and sleep on it. The architecture is enforcing a political and social rule without anyone having to say a single word.
A brilliant modern parallel. Foucault argued that spatial order creates a political disposition.
A political disposition, meaning it makes you feel a certain way about authority.
Yes. He talked about how certain architectures create docile bodies.
Docile bodies.
People who are compliant, submissive, and conditioned to accept authority simply by existing in that space. And that is exactly what the classic period enclosed palaces did.
The ones with the heavy masonry we talked about earlier.
Right. The thick walls, the restricted sightlines, the physical exhaustion of having to climb a steep pyramid just to be denied entry at the top.
It wears you down.
That architecture physically trained the Maya populace to accept their low status. It manufactured those docile bodies.
So when Patmal and the new regime start building public ball courts and redirecting the water systems to the lower elevations, they are intentionally trying to force a totally different political disposition.
They are moving away from an architecture of dominance toward an architecture of engagement.
Okay.
Take the public ball court, for instance. It isn't just a sports arena. The Mesoamerican ball game was deeply tied to politics, to conflict resolution, and to public spectacle.
It was a major civic event.
Exactly. By building a massive new T-shaped court in a highly accessible area, they are creating a venue for public gathering and communal identity.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I have to push back here.
Out.
My cynical brain looks at a new ruler coming in, building public parks, and handing out imported goods, and I immediately think, this is a PR stunt.
It's a very fair point to raise.
Like, think of a modern billionaire whose company gets caught dumping chemicals in a river, so they suddenly donate millions to build a public library to distract everyone from the bad press.
Bread and circuses.
Exactly. Could Pat Mel just be trying to buy off the public's affection while secretly maintaining total autocratic control behind the scenes?
It is the necessary question to ask when evaluating any political shift, ancient or modern. But the material evidence pushes back hard against the PR stunt theory.
Really? How so?
If it were merely a facade, you would expect to see a few highly visible monuments. Maybe a grand stela in the plaza proclaiming his immense generosity.
Right, a billboard saying how great he is.
But the underlying distribution of resources would remain hoarded. That isn't what happened at Ucanal.
The water infrastructure is really the sticking point here, isn't it?
It absolutely is. You do not overhaul the fundamental hydrological engineering of an entire city to benefit the poorest neighborhoods just for optics.
Because it's just too much work.
The labor cost is astronomically high. You do it because you materially require their support.
You actually need them.
We have to remember the context of the terminal classic crisis. The population was shrinking. People were abandoning cities all over the region.
Right, they were just walking away into the jungle.
The elites could no longer rely on divine fear to keep the farmers farming.
And if the farmers leave, the overlord starves.
Precisely. To maintain power in this unstable era, the elites actually needed public consensus.
It wasn't optional anymore.
It wasn't. They needed the commoners to buy into the new system, to stay at Ucanal, and to keep the economy moving. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted from a vertical hierarchy to a necessary interdependency.
They needed each other.
The elites had to genuinely share the wealth to keep the polity from completely disintegrating.
That is a staggering realization. They were backed into a corner where genuine public investment was literally the only viable survival strategy.
And it worked.
It worked.
Yeah.
And to truly understand how this new consensus-based government operated on a daily basis, we have to look at the centerpiece of this entire research project. We have to walk into Structure K1.
Structure K1. It is the architectural manifestation of everything we've been discussing today.
It really is. So it's located on the east side of a massive public area known as Plaza K.
Yes.
And the details of the excavation are incredibly vivid in the paper. The researchers describe it as a colonnaded open hall. It was built in two distinct phases during the Terminal Classic, and it sat on a relatively low platform.
Not a towering pyramid.
Right, a low platform.
Mm-hmm.
Paint that picture for us. What are we actually looking at if we are standing in Plaza K?
Well, you are looking at something completely alien to the old classic Maya design. Instead of a solid, imposing masonry wall blocking your view, the front of this building is defined by a series of columns.
Columns?
Yes. The archaeologists found column bases made of small, neatly worked cut stones, perhaps 15 to 20 centimeters in length, forming a foundation. And resting on those bases were the columns themselves, which were likely made of solid timber or perhaps wood thickly coated in stucco.
And these were big columns.
Substantial. They were about 0.8 meters or nearly 3 feet in diameter.
Wow. So you have this wide, low platform accessible by broad stairs and a roof supported by these stout 3-foot columns. The entire front facade is completely open to the plaza.
Completely open.
And inside, they excavated a small rectangular altar, which was curiously set off-center.
Right, and the off-center placement is actually a very specific architectural template that becomes prominent in later periods in the northern Yucatan. It ties Ucanal to broader regional trends.
Showing those trade connections again.
Exactly. But the most radical feature of Structure K1 isn't the altar.
What is it?
It's the alignment of the building itself. Structure K1 is what we might categorize as rebel architecture.
I love that term, rebel architecture.
Yeah.
How does a building rebel?
It rebels against the established spatial grid. Underneath Structure K1, the archaeologists found the remains of a late classic causeway, a raised, paved road known as a sacbe.
Okay, so there was an older road underneath it.
And this older causeway was oriented perfectly to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west.
Which is a big deal in their religion, right?
A massive deal. In Maya cosmology, cardinal directions are deeply sacred. Almost all the older traditional public buildings at Ucanal adhered strictly to this cardinal orientation.
It was the accepted, divinely sanctioned way to build a city. You just don't mess with north, south, east, west.
But Structure K1 deliberately breaks that sacred rule.
Wait, really?
Yes, it is built directly over the old causeway, but it is aligned 33 to 34 degrees east of north.
It is literally built at a defiant, skewed angle right across the old infrastructure.
It cuts right across it.
Why would they intentionally misalign a major public building like that?
It is a physical, permanent disruption of the old spatial order.
They're doing it on purpose to make a point.
Absolutely. By intentionally breaking the cardinal grid, the builders of K1 are making a loud statement that this building and the politics that happen inside it do not belong to the old ways.
Wow.
It is a visual break from the past. And the open, colonnaded form of the building identifies it as an early example of a very specific type of civic architecture.
Right, the Popol Na.
The Popol Na in Yucatec Maya, or Popol Pat in Pokemon Maya, which translates to council house.
A council house. That sounds very democratic.
It is. And we are so fortunate to have 16th century ethnohistoric documents that describe exactly how these council houses functioned in later Maya society.
So we actually know what went on in there.
We do. They were the civic hubs of the community. This wasn't a throne room for a single, isolated king. It was a gathering place where the political leaders, the noblemen, and the heads of various lineages would assemble together.
And they were doing real practical work in there, right?
Very practical. The sources say they met to deliberate on political accords, to adjudicate crimes, to discuss warfare and defense.
Like a town hall.
Exactly. And even to prepare for community festivals, weddings, and dances. It was a courthouse, a war room, and a community center all rolled into one open building.
And this is where the architecture becomes truly revolutionary. Because structure K1 lacked those thick, restrictive masonry walls of the past. And because its entire front was open to the plaza.
Anyone standing down in Plaza K could look up through those columns and see exactly what was happening inside.
We are right back to our open plan office analogy.
They are.
If the overlord is debating a new trade route with the local lineage head, or if they are passing judgment on a thief, the public is standing right there, watching it unfold in real time.
It completely annihilates the secrecy of the old regime.
It's forced transparency.
Exactly. And to appreciate just how unique this specific balance of architecture was at Ucanal, the researchers provide a brilliant comparative emphasis in the paper.
Because there were other council houses.
Right. The concept of a council house wasn't entirely new to Ucanal. Other Maya cities had buildings they used for assembly, but the way those other cities designed their buildings tells us everything about their specific political realities.
The paper basically outlines a tale of three cities, right, to show us why Ucanal's design was the Goldilocks zone for actual transparency.
Right. Let's start by looking backwards to a much earlier council house at the famous site of Petén in Honduras.
Okay, Copan.
This is structure 10L22A, and it was built around AB 750 during the height of the late Classic period.
So before the big crisis.
Yes. And Copan's structure 22A is a fascinating building. Archaeologists identify it as a council house largely due to its iconography.
What's on?
The exterior features a prominent mat or knot motif, the pop design.
Like woven reeds, right?
Yes, the woven mat was the quintessential Maya symbol for a seat of authority.
Oh, I see.
It visually represents individual strands woven together into a unified community.
Which is a beautiful metaphor for a council. All the different lineages woven together.
It's a great metaphor, but the physical reality of the building contradicts that metaphor entirely.
Because when you look at the floor plan of Copan's council house, it's nothing like the open hall of Ucanal.
Not at all.
It is highly segmented. It features small interior rooms separated by incredibly thick stone walls.
Right. And what's fascinating here is that the internal design of Copan's council house entirely defeated the purpose of horizontal equal communication.
How so?
Well, if you have a dozen lineage heads gathering to forge a consensus, you need a space where everyone can see and hear each other simultaneously. But in Copan, the rooms were too small.
Ah, so you can't fit everyone in one space.
The thick walls blocked sightlines and ruined the acoustics.
It's like trying to have a collaborative, egalitarian brainstorming session in a VIP nightclub.
That's a good way to put it.
Sure, you are all technically in the same building, but everyone is sectioned off into private booths. You can't address the whole room. Someone is always secluded in the most important central room, and everyone else is marginalized.
It's a council house in name, but structurally, it still enforces a strict hierarchy. The space dictated that some voices were inherently more central than others.
Okay, so that's Copan. What about the other extreme?
If we move to the other extreme, we can look at what archaeologists have found in the northern Maya lowlands, at sites like Zibilchaltén.
The researchers refer to these as the superpopolnas.
The super council houses.
These buildings were massive. The paper notes that some of them were over 130 meters long.
Just incredibly long structures.
Constructed with incredibly thick masonry walls and heavy roofs. 130 meters. That's significantly longer than an American football field.
It is. And that extreme size creates the exact opposite problem of Copan.
Right.
I mean, a 130-meter-long building makes a breathtaking, monumental statement. Viewed from the outside, a massive horizontal building clearly communicates a concept of shared expansive power.
As opposed to a tall, pointy pyramid that points to a single ruler.
Exactly. But practically speaking, for the daily mechanics of governance, they were a logistical nightmare.
Just think about the acoustics. How do you have an intimate consensus-building discussion about, say, local water rights across a 130-meter stone hallway?
You can't.
You just can't. It's like trying to hold a sensitive board meeting while standing on opposite ends of a sports stadium. You'd have to scream at each other, and the echoes off the stone would make it impossible to understand anything.
The sheer scale precluded effective communication. Furthermore, because they retained those thick masonry walls, the activities inside were still largely obscured from the public in the plaza outside.
So they were monumentally large, but they were not transparent.
Exactly. Which brings us back to Ucanal's structure K1.
Sitting right in that architectural Goldilocks zone.
It really was.
It wasn't so segmented and private that it enforced a hierarchy like Copan. And it wasn't so massively unwieldy that you couldn't actually hold a normal meeting like Sibelschalten.
It had the perfect dimensions.
And those crucial open columned fronts. It allowed for actual effective collaboration among the leaders while simultaneously guaranteeing total visibility to the public outside.
It struck the precise balance necessary for this new era of heterarchy.
Heterarchy. Define heterarchy for us, just to be crystal clear on the terminology.
Sure. Heterarchy is a system of organization where power is unranked, or where power is shared horizontally among multiple actors who possess different types of influence.
So it's the opposite of a strict top-down hierarchy.
Exactly. Structure K1 was essentially a machine built to facilitate heterarchy.
But this shift from vertical hierarchy to horizontal collaboration, it wasn't just happening in the bricks and mortar.
No, it permeated everything.
This new mentality of power sharing bled entirely into their material culture, their pop culture, and their art.
It is a fundamental rule of archaeology. Art imitates life, and life imitates art. As the underlying political structure shifted at Ucanal, the visual language that the Maya used to represent themselves shifted in tandem.
The researchers highlight a specific artistic trope that just explodes in popularity during the Terminal Classic period. They call them conference scenes.
Conference scenes.
And we don't just see them on one specific type of object. They're found on fine orange molded carved vases, on incised lunate-shaped marine shell pendants, and on massive stone monuments. Let's unpack those objects for a second. What makes a vase fine orange?
Fine orange pottery is a very specific, high-quality ceramic ware that became incredibly widespread during the Terminal Classic.
What makes it fine?
It's made from a very fine clay paste that requires no temper.
Temper.
Temper is the additives, like crushed rock or shell, usually mixed into clay to prevent it from cracking during firing. But because this clay was so incredibly fine, it didn't need it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And because it was so fine, it could be pressed into very detailed molds. This meant it could be mass-produced and widely traded, specifically along those river and coastal networks controlled by groups like the Petén and Chantal Maya.
The exact groups Pat Mal is associated with.
Exactly. So the medium itself, the physical vase, is a symbol of this new cosmopolitan trade-based economy.
And what about the lunate-shaped shell pendants? Lunate means crescent moon-shaped, right?
Yes. These were ornaments carved from marine shells into a crescent shape. The crescent moon is often associated with nocturnal deities, or with specific regional artistic styles that were gaining prominence as the old classic center of gravity shifted.
So on all these diverse, heavily traded items, we start seeing these conference scenes. What exactly are we looking at in these scenes?
Well, to understand the impact of these scenes, we have to remember the classic period baseline we talked about earlier.
Right, the old way.
In traditional Maya art, the visual hierarchy is absolute. The divine king is almost always depicted physically larger than everyone else in the frame.
Just dominating the image.
He is positioned higher up in the composition. And crucially, he is usually placed on the right side of the scene facing left, while subordinate figures face him from the left.
It's just like ancient Egyptian art, where the pharaoh is drawn like 3 times larger than his enemies or his servants to show that he is literally a bigger deal.
Exactly. The spatial ordering of the art reinforces the apical hierarchy of the politics.
But in these terminal classic conference scenes, that hierarchical composition vanishes completely.
It's gone.
Instead, the leaders are shown sitting side by side. They're facing each other in profile, and most importantly, they are drawn at the exact same relative proportion.
They are the same size.
The most striking example the paper provides is Caracol Altar 12. This is a large stone monument dating to AD 820 found at the nearby site of Caracol, and it actually depicts our guy, Patmal of Ucanal.
It does. Altar 12 at Caracol depicts a meeting between Patmallo and the local ruler of Caracol, a king named Kinich Tubilyopat.
The visual details described are just fascinating. They are seated facing each other. But I have to ask, what does this actually mean in practice?
What do you mean?
Well, Patmal is sitting there, same size, same eye level as the local king. Did they genuinely view each other as equals? Or was this just, ancient diplomatic politeness?
Diplomatic politeness.
Like when the President of the United States takes a photo shaking hands with the Prime Minister of a very small country. They stand as equals for the camera, smiling, but everyone knows exactly who controls the larger military.
Right, right. That is the essential nuance of heterarchy. We know from the epigraphy that Patmallo, holding that high title of Orkshinkaluntis, was technically a highly dominant overlord.
He had the power.
In the raw geopolitical reality of that region at that time, he was almost certainly the more powerful figure in that room. However, the key is that he allowed himself to be depicted as a peer.
He allowed his image to be carved into permanent stone on an equal footing.
Yes. Flexing his absolute superiority forcing the Caracol king to be drawn groveling at his feet, that would have undermined the very system of alliance building and consensus he was desperately trying to forge.
I see.
This carving wasn't just the snapshot of a meeting, it was a visual contract. It was a public declaration of power sharing in a really fragile landscape.
By choosing to be depicted horizontally, Patmal was communicating that his governance relied on diplomacy and mutual respect, rather than just brute subjugation.
It is brilliant political branding.
He's essentially broadcasting. I am the paramount overlord, but I respect the system enough to sit at the table at eye level.
Exactly.
But as Dr. Halperin and her colleagues point out, if you look really closely at these conference scenes on the vases and the altars, there is a massive, glaring omission.
A critical piece of the society is entirely missing from the artwork.
The art shows all these elite leaders, the kings, the overlords, the noblemen, sitting together sharing power. But where are the ordinary people?
They're not there.
Where are the merchants who traded the fine orange pottery? Where are the farmers who dug the canals? Where are the women who managed the household economies and held significant community power? None of them are carved into these conference scenes.
They are absent from the stone altars, yes. But we have to pull back and look at the spatial context of the architecture we just discussed.
Okay, structure K1.
Right. They weren't in the carvings, but they were in the plaza.
Right. They were the ones standing out in the heat of Plaza K looking up at structure K1.
This brings us to the core thesis of the research, the concept of participatory politics.
Participatory politics.
The open facades of these colonnaded council houses fundamentally transformed politics. It was no longer a secret ritual performed in a dark, vaulted room. It was a theatrical spectacle.
The crowd in the plaza became the audience. But what is the actual power of an audience? Were they just there to be entertained, or did they have tangible leverage?
Their role was to be active witnesses, and witnessing is a profound form of power.
How so?
In any society, ancient or modern, political consensus isn't just a signed piece of paper or a carved stone treaty. It is an emotional and communal reality that has to be maintained day after day.
You have to keep the people believing in it.
For the Maya, this consensus was forged through a highly curated sensory experience in the plaza.
What did that experience feel like if you were standing there?
It was a mixture of profound emotions. There was awe, the smell of burning copal incense wafting out from the council house, the visual spectacle of the leaders engaging with the sacred elements of the rituals.
So there's still a religious element?
Definitely. There was also fear witnessing the adjudication of crimes, corporal punishments, or even sacrifices happening right there on the platform for everyone to see.
A reminder of who is in charge.
Yes. And there was communal memory listening to the leaders publicly recount the history and myth history of the city.
So the elites are essentially putting on a highly produced show to constantly convince the crowd that the new government is legitimate and effective.
Yes, But if we draw again on Foucault's philosophies,
Foucault's doing a lot of work today.
he is. But this time, looking at his analysis of the early modern European public scaffold, where executions and punishments were carried out in front of massive crowds, we learn a critical lesson about the nature of spectacles from that.
What's the lesson?
A crowd is never truly passive.
Because the moment you put on a show, you give the audience the power to react to it.
Exactly. Foucault noted that the European crowds gathering around the scaffold had actual agency. If they felt a punishment was unjust, they could shout down the executioner. They could riot.
They could flip the script.
Or, perhaps even more devastating to the ruler's legitimacy, they could simply choose not to show up.
Wow. If nobody comes to the plaza to watch your rule is effectively meaningless.
By creating a radically open building like Structure K1, the elites of Ucanal were implicitly agreeing to be watched. They were submitting themselves to the gaze and the judgment of the public.
Because they had to.
They desperately needed the crowd to validate their decisions because they could no longer rely on divine mandate alone. The rain god excuse wasn't working anymore.
The architecture itself implies that the elites were now fundamentally accountable to the populace. If the leaders negotiated a terrible trade deal, or if they tried to hoard the water again, the people were standing right there.
They could express their dissent immediately.
Denying the rulers the consensus they needed to survive the terminal classic crisis.
No.
I want you, the listener, to just place yourself in that moment for a second. Imagine standing in the dusty, sweltering heat of Plaza K over 1,000 years ago.
The smells, the noise of the crowd.
You look up past the broad, white, stuccoed stairs. You look past those thick, round columns. And right there, sitting in the shade of the council house roof, you watch this foreign-born overlord negotiating a water rights treaty with your local lineage head.
You're watching history happen.
The building itself empowered you. It gave the everyday populace the power to hold their leaders accountable simply by having the unencumbered right to look at them.
It is an architectural revolution that completely flips the narrative of the tragic Maya collapse on its head.
It really, really does. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's just take a moment to summarize the sheer scale of the journey we've been on today.
It's been quite a ride.
We started with the fiery, deliberate destruction of a divine king's tomb, the literal crushing and burning of the old world order.
Paving over the gods.
We tracked the arrival of Patmello, a merchant warrior overlord, who realized that his own survival meant investing heavy labor into water systems for the poorest neighborhoods.
A pragmatic survivor.
And we explored the creation of Structure K1, the colonnaded council house that literally made the mechanics of government transparent.
The archaeological evidence from Ucanal proves that the ancient Maya didn't just passively collapse when their climate and their political systems failed.
They adapted.
They innovated. They fundamentally democratized elements of their power structures in order to survive a rapidly changing, incredibly dangerous world.
It is a profound story of resilience. But before we sign off, I know you have a final thought on this, something that really connects this 9th century history to the world we are all navigating right now.
I do. It's a thought that isn't explicitly laid out in the archaeological data, but it's deeply rooted in the themes we've explored today.
Let's hear it.
The ancient Maya realized that surviving a systemic crisis, a time when their world was literally falling apart due to environmental stress and failing institutions, required them to open their doors and let the public watch their every move.
Force transparency to survive.
Right. And it makes you wonder about our modern institutions. We are currently living in a world of increasing information overload, intense political instability, and massive systemic challenges.
To say the least.
When our systems are stressed, is true resilience found in building thicker walls, heavier doors, and more restricted spaces to protect our leaders?
Yeah.
Or is it found in tearing those walls down, opening the floor plan, and trusting the crowd enough to let them see inside?
That is a question that will definitely stick with you. Are we building segmented palaces, or are we building open council houses? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the terminal classic Maya. Keep looking closely at the structures around you, keep asking how they're trying to shape you, and we will catch you next time.